Major news coming out of Texas, of course, as those redistricting efforts continue there. The Associated Press reporting that week-long walkout by Texas House Democrats still blocking redrawn congressional maps sought by President Trump and put in motion a broadening fight across the U.S. over redistricting. There is still no swift end in sight to the standoff that has scattered dozens of Texas Democrats to places like Illinois, New York, and California, where they have been given a warm reception by blue state governors and national party leaders. Joining us now to discuss the latest and where we stand this weekend is political analyst and historian Rich Rubino. Rich, good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
All right, let's just start with the basics, then some background. We're looking ahead to the 2026 midterm elections. So what's at stake with that?
Yes, and the midterm elections are very important. It could potentially scuttle President Donald Trump's agenda for the last 2 years of his presidency. Generally speaking, in the 6th year of a presidency, the party in power loses seats. Bill Clinton in 1998, its Democrats picked up seats for the first time since James Monroe in 1820, for example. The House of Representatives is currently very close. There are currently 13 members who are Democrats who represent districts that were last time voted for Donald Trump. Only 3 members are Republicans who represent congressional districts that last time voted for Vice President Harris. So it's very, very close. I think Donald Trump fears that he's going to lose seats, that he potentially could lose the House of Representatives in the midterm elections. Accordingly, very sympathetic governors and sympathetic state legislators like Greg Abbott in Texas and like the state legislature in Texas as well are doing all they possibly can to gain potentially 5 more seats in the House of Representatives that would potentially go to Republicans. So I think that's basically what's at stake.
And Rich, now redistricting with congressional maps, that's not uncommon. It's something that does happen within several of these states and all of that legislation. But what makes this situation particularly unique?
Because they're doing it not in the usually they do it usually it's done in the year with begins in a 0 for the next 10 years. What's happening here is they're doing it midway through a term, for example. It certainly is something that is constitutionally permissible. Texas has done this in the past. In 2003, for example, Tom DeLay, a congressman from Sugar Land, Texas, who was the House Majority Leader at the time, was trying to shore up the majorities in the House of Representatives. So consequently, he basically started his own, he kind of spearheaded this gerrymandering of the Texas legislature, and he did this in midterm after 2000, when Texas Democrats actually lost control of the House of Representatives for the first time in Texas, for the first time basically since the Civil War. Tom DeLay saw an opening, and they did this midterm, and this really benefited the Texas Republicans. Conservative Democrats like Charlie Stenholm and Martin Frost ended up losing their seats. Chris Bell, who later challenged Rick Perry for governor in 2006, lost his seat in the House of Representatives. Basically, they lost 5 seats. Only Chad Edwards from Waco, in the terms of moderate to conservative Democrats from conservative districts, basically kept his seat in the House of Representatives. So it's been done before. I think that this is called partisan gerrymandering. And partisan gerrymandering is when the party that holds the majority of the governor and potentially the state legislators work to try to gerrymander the states in a way that will potentially benefit their congressional delegations and try to numerically increase their numbers in the House of Representatives, in the United States House of Representatives, that is.
We are taking a live look right now over in Austin, Texas, the capital of the Lone Star State. As I mentioned before, a lot of these Democratic lawmakers, they have left the state of Texas, trying to just not even be a part of this entire voting process. Now, Rich, is their tactic going to work? I mean, how long can they stay away from the state? How long can they avoid addressing this issue?
Well, Texas does not have a full-time legislature. They have a part-time legislature, and they meet basically every 2 years for a very short period of time. Now, Greg Abbott does have, in the Texas Constitution, plenary authority to declare special sessions for 30 days. What's a special session? that's where they have a session where they're not, that's when that's not a regularly scheduled session, and they're usually for 30-day periods. So what's happened is the Texas legislature has walked out of the special session, not the regular session that they have for 140 days every 2 years, but for the special session. So what potentially Greg Abbott could do is he suggested this, as soon as this one is over, he could declare another special session. He can really do this in time for time immemorial, just continue, that is, to declare special sessions and try to embarrass the Democrats for not showing up. He will essentially, his message and the Republicans' message will be that Democrats are not showing up. Their job is to show up and work for the people. There's other things, for example, flood relief that the Democrats would not be there to potentially vote on. So he could really make this embarrassing for Democrats. That being said, Democrats have found some very positive forces in California and Illinois, for example, and there's a possibility that other states could essentially, this could start a domino effect, and other states that are Democratic leaning, like Illinois, could do their own midterm redistricting, and they could try to gain seats for the Democratic Party. So this could really work to their advantage. In California, they have a nonpartisan redistricting commission, but Governor Gavin Newsom had suggested that he could potentially get on the ballot midterm redistricting, and obviously California is a Democratic state, and they could try to somehow push out some of the Republican members and make California more hospitable for the Democratic Party.
We've heard a few terms being talked about throughout the last several days. So with Texas specifically, it's this congressional redistricting. With California, though, the governor there talking about political maps and possibly, excuse me, changing those. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Yes, in California, so in California, they can basically there's a map of every state, and this goes back really to Elbridge Gerry when he was the governor of Massachusetts. That's where this term gerrymandering came from. How they got from the hard G to the soft G, nobody really knows, but it goes back to Elbridge Gerry being governor of Massachusetts. He signed legislation that benefited the Democratic Republican Party congressional campaign, congressional the Congress, the House of Representatives, rather, to benefit the Democratic Republican the Democratic Republicans. So he signed that legislation. It wasn't really a major thing that he had signed. It was more of a minor piece, he thought at the time, but it really got a lot of national attention. Since then, states have been basically maneuvering the maps to try to benefit a political party. We have a scenario right now where in 40 states, they have the trifecta, the governor, in both houses of the state legislature are essentially are controlled by one party, which means that they'll do everything they possibly can to make sure that their congressional delegation maximizes the power of that political party. So in a state like Texas, for example, they're doing it by partisan gerrymandering to try to benefit the Republicans in the state of Texas. Donald Trump has said that he thinks that they could win 5 seats. That could be just enough for the Republicans to maintain control of the House of Representatives. I think that Trump saw what happened in 2018 when his party lost the House of Representatives. He saw that he had less power. The House of Representatives, obviously, he wants to be in Republican control. In California, they currently have a nonpartisan commission. The same thing in a state like Iowa, for example. This was something that was really spearheaded by then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger was very much a vociferous supporter of this, and it basically allows for this commission to establish how the maps will be drawn. But Governor Gavin Newsom wants it to be potentially a more partisan gerrymandering. His basic argument is if Texas does this for the Republicans, we're going to try to equal that up, and we're going to do this for the state. We're going to redraw the maps in the state of California. Other governors, like Governor Pritzker in Illinois, for example, has suggested he may do the same thing. So this really could have a ripple or a snowball effect, if you will.
We're taking live look here for our viewers out of LAX there in Los Angeles, California. Rich, I'm glad you brought up President Trump, because that was going to be my next question. How much influence does the Trump administration have in this whole issue?
I think it has a lot of influence in this issue, even though Donald Trump directly is not a legislation that he can sign. There's nothing that really he has direct power to work on this. It's something that the states have plenary authority to work on. But what he can do is he can really use the bully pulpit. He can try to galvanize legislators in states, for example, conservative states. He can potentially, they may run for Congress someday. He can say that I might, essentially endorse you. He could even make endorsements in state legislative races, and he can really bang the drum. He can really bang the drum on this, and he can hold press conferences. He can certainly speak for members of the legislature, and he can really make this a kind of a flagship issue. It may seem like a really kind of Byzantine issue, and it might kind of bore people, but what this really does is this potentially could determine who's hegemonic over the House of Representatives next time around. Donald Trump knows this. That's why he's really going to be spearheading this from the White House, even though he has no direct authority over it.
And then, Rich, just one final question for you, still regarding President Trump. Later on this week, well, on Friday coming up, he is set to meet with
Yeah.
the Russian President Vladimir Putin to talk about that whole war between Russia and Ukraine. I wanted to ask you, when it comes to these meetings that Putin has had with U.S. presidents, how have those gone within past administrations?
Well, it's interesting. The one that really stands out is George W. Bush back in 2001. They met at George W. Bush's ranch over in Crawford, Texas. And at the end, George W. Bush basically said that he looked into Vladimir Putin's soul and that Vladimir Putin was kind of a good man. I think that I think probably George W. Bush himself kind of regrets that, but other presidents, but he certainly had a very cordial relationship with Vladimir Putin. I think that Barack Obama, it was a lot more adversarial. Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin were very much ideologically at the other end of the spectrum. I think they're very similar to Joe Biden. Joe Biden basically met with him once, and then after that, he was really persona non grata. After the Russia invasion of the Ukraine, very similar. I think Barack Obama, after the Russian invasion of the country of Georgia, for example, had more of a hands-off approach with Vladimir Putin, but he did certainly meet with him, and he was certainly welcomed into the good graces to a certain degree of the president. Donald Trump obviously had a much more cordial relationship. There was some reports that Vladimir Putin and that the Russians had tried to influence the presidential campaign. Donald Trump basically said that that was not true, and he said this at one point with Vladimir Putin there right next to him. So they had a lot more of a cordial relationship. Obviously, once Donald Trump came in after Joe Biden egressed from office, it became more cordial, though Donald Trump does oftentimes excoriate Vladimir Putin for sometimes his use of military force and what he views as much as an aggressive use of force in the war in the Ukraine. So that's really kind of the chronology, if you will.
Right, political analyst and historian Rich Rubino. Always good to have you here at Live Now from Fox to break down the week's top stories, but also looking ahead to that big meeting next week. We'll talk soon.
Thank you so much.
Of course, you take care.